I am 71 years old, and every morning I still wake up at 6:12. Not 6, not 6:30, 6:12. That was Margaret's alarm time for 40 years, and even 3 winters after she died. My body hasn't forgiven me for surviving her. The apartment is quiet at that hour. Too quiet. The refrigerator hums like it's thinking. The cheap wall clock clicks once a second. Plastic, pretending to be patient. I sit at the small kitchen table with 1 cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and stare at the window across from me. Same crack in the lower right corner. Same condensation line where the cold never quite seals. I own this place, or rather I used to. Technically, it's still mine, on paper. For now, my son Daniel likes to say, "Let's not get lost in technicalities, Dad." He says it with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Daniel is 44. He wears soft sweaters that look expensive without looking loud. His wife, Melissa, prefers words like practical and temporary. Their voices are always calm when they talk about money, which is how you know you're the one losing it. After Margaret's funeral, March 18th, 2022, raining sideways. I couldn't stay in the house alone. The silence there was heavier, meaner. Every room felt like it was waiting for her to walk back in and scold me for leaving a light on. Daniel suggested I move closer to them. Just for a while, he said, helping me fold sweaters I hadn't worn since Clinton was in office. Until you're back on your feet. I didn't know grief had feet, but I nodded. At first, it really did feel like help. Melissa stocked the fridge with yogurt I didn't ask for. Daniel installed a new router and explained it twice, slowly, like you explain fire to a caveman. They handled the complicated stuff. Insurance, subscriptions, bills. You've earned a break, Daniel told me. Let us worry about it. I let him. That was my first mistake. The second came on April 3rd, 2022, when he asked me to add him as an authorized user on my checking account. Just in case, he said, tapping his phone. Emergencies. You know, if something happens. I knew what he meant by something. A fall, a stroke, the quiet ending everyone else imagines for you once you cross 70. I signed. By June, my pension $180 a month deposited on the 1st was being managed. That was Daniel's word. Managed sounded responsible. Adult. By September, I noticed I never seemed to have more than a few hundred left by the 20th. Inflation, Melissa said lightly, passing me a plate of chicken I'd paid for. Everything's up. Gas, groceries, utilities. It all sounded reasonable when she listed it fast enough. I didn't argue. I hadn't argued much since Margaret died. She used to argue for both of us. Instead, I watched. I watched Daniel upgrade his phone in October. I watched Melissa book a December flight to Aspen. Non-refundable, but such a good deal. I watched my bank app notify me of transfers I didn't remember making. $3,200, $4,750, $9,900. Always rounded, always clean, like someone who respects numbers more than people. When I asked, Daniel sighed, "Dad, come on, that's family expenses. You live with us now." I lived in the guest room. I bought my own groceries. I turned off lights like a criminal covering his tracks. But I nodded. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet resentment. Their smart TV was bigger than my first car. The couch cost more than Margaret's funeral. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear them talking in the kitchen. Not whispering, calculating. "He doesn't eat all that liquidity," Melissa said once, clear as day. Daniel answered, "I know. I'm handling it." Handling me. The phrase that finally settled in my bones came in January, over oatmeal gone cold. Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said it casually, too casually. "You know, Dad, we're basically supporting you now. So let's not pretend this money isn't shared." Shared. I looked at his hands. Clean. Soft. No grease under the nails. Hands that had never fixed a boiler at 2 a.m. Hands that had never written a check knowing it would bounce if you miscounted by $10. I swallowed my oatmeal and said nothing. But something in me started counting again. And once you start counting, you can't stop. Not until the numbers tell you exactly who you become. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. I didn't confront them right away. Old men who confront too early end up apologizing for things they didn't do. Instead, I started keeping quiet and paying attention. The first thing I did was buy a notebook, a cheap one, spiral-bound blue cover, 50 pages. I hid it behind the extra cereal boxes in the pantry, the kind Melissa bought in bulk because it was more economical, even though no one but me ever ate it. I titled the first page dates /amounts/explanations. April 3rd, 2022. Authorized, user added. June 1st, pension deposit, $4,180. June 4th, transfer out, $2,500, household. June 18th, transfer out, $1,200, utilities. I wrote slowly, carefully, the way I used to fill out work orders back, when mistakes meant sparks and lawsuits. At night, when the house finally settled and the dishwasher clicked itself to sleep, I checked my phone again. Same app, same numbers, different feeling. By August, the pattern was clear. Every month, my account emptied like clockwork. Not randomly, not chaotically, deliberately. On September 12th, there was a charge for airline tickets. $6,840. 2 first-class seats to Zurich. I hadn't left the state in 10 years. When I asked Daniel about it, he didn't even blink. Melissa's sister. Emergency. We talked about this, Dad. We had not. But he said it like we had, like the conversation had happened somewhere I must have forgotten. That was the trick. Make it sound like memory loss instead of theft. October brought something new. A mortgage payment. $3,100. Transferred on the 15th. I stared at the screen long enough for my coffee to go cold. Why am I paying a mortgage? I asked that evening. Melissa smiled the way nurses smile when they're about to move your bed without asking. Well, you live here. Daniel added, it's only fair, Dad. We refinanced last year. Rates were insane. We refinanced. As if my signature hadn't been on that loan once. As if the house hadn't been bought with my down payment. $210,000 in 2006. Wired from my savings the week Margaret was diagnosed. I wrote it down. November was worse. 2 wire transfers. One for $18,000. One for $27,500. When I finally asked where almost $50,000 had gone, Daniel's patience cracked just enough for me to see what lived underneath. Jesus, Dad, do you have any idea how expensive life is right now? His voice wasn't angry. It was offended, as if I'd accused him of something tacky. You're acting like we're stealing from you, he said. Melissa crossed her arms. We've put our lives on hold for you. For me. I thought of Margaret, vomiting quietly into the sink at 3 a.m. because she didn't want to wake me. I thought of the years I drove home with numb fingers because gloves cost money we needed elsewhere. I nodded. That night, I downloaded 12 months of bank statements and emailed them to myself. Twice. Then I printed them at the library the next morning, feeding the machine quarters like confession tokens. The librarian didn't look at me. I'm good at being invisible. At the long table by the windows, I spread the papers out and began circling numbers with a red pen. $92,400, household. $14,600, medical. $63,000, travel. $118,000, miscellaneous transfers. By December 31st, the total was just over $287,000. In 9 months, I felt oddly calm. Panic is for people who still think this might be an accident. January brought the conversation that finally removed any doubt. We were sitting in the living room, the big one, the room I never used because the couch felt too expensive to sit on. Snow pressed against the windows like an audience. Daniel had his laptop open. Charts, spreadsheets. My name was on one of them. You're not really liquid anymore, he said, matter of fact. So we need to be smarter. Smarter how? I asked. Well, he leaned back, clasped his hands behind his head. You don't really need direct access to your accounts. It's just stress. Melissa nodded. And stress isn't good at your age. My age. I asked one more question, carefully. And if I say no? Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. Dad, don't be dramatic. You depend on us. Let's not pretend otherwise. There it was. Depend. Not live with. Not family. Depend. I went to bed early that night and lay awake until my hand stopped shaking. The next morning I called a bank I hadn't used since the 90s. The woman on the phone spoke clearly and didn't rush me. I asked about account freezes, revocable trusts, Power of attorney limits. She didn't sound surprised. You'd be amazed how often this happens, she said quietly. On February 2nd, I opened a new account in my own name. On February 5th, I moved $480,000 into it. Daniel noticed 3 days later. He stood in the doorway of my room, phone in hand, face tight. Did you move money? I looked at him, really looked, at the man who had learned to speak gently while emptying me out. Yes, I said. He exhaled sharply. You can't just do that. I already did. Silence filled the space between us. Charged. Finally, he said the words I would remember for the rest of my life. Careful, Dad. Don't forget who's taking care of you. I can cut you off. From what, I thought? From my own money? I didn't answer. I just reached for my notebook and added a new line. February 8th, threat issued. After Daniel said it, I can cut you off. The house changed temperature. Not literally. The thermostat stayed at 71, same as always. But the air felt thinner, like a room where something fragile had already broken, and everyone was pretending not to hear it shatter. He stood there for a moment longer, waiting for me to flinch, waiting for apology, for fear. I gave him neither. Instead, I asked, would you close the door on your way out? That surprised him. People like Daniel expect resistance or surrender. Calm irritates them. Calm makes them suspicious. He closed the door a little harder than necessary. That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear. Fear had already burned itself out. But from clarity. The kind that arrives late in life, when there's no one left to impress and very little left to lose. At 2:40 a.m., I made a list in my notebook. What they control, access to the house. Daily narrative we're helping Dad. Appearances, what they do not control. The law, my signature. My silence. In the morning, Melissa acted cheerful. Loudly cheerful. She fried eggs I didn't ask for and hummed something upbeat. Like happiness was a defense strategy. Big day, she said. Daniel's meeting with the financial planner. The financial planner. I noticed she didn't say I won't be home for dinner, Daniel added, not looking up from his phone. Client thing. Client. Another word that had quietly replaced family. By noon, I was at the downtown branch of my original bank, the one Daniel hated because their interface is prehistoric. The man who helped me was named Carl, late 50s, divorced, ring mark. Realize he didn't rush me. We went through everything, line by line, authorization scopes, transfer histories, devices logged into my account. When he turned the screen toward me, I felt something cold and steady settle behind my ribs. There it was, Daniel's phone, Melissa's tablet, locations pinging from places I'd never been. He didn't authorize these devices? Carl asked gently. No, I said. I trusted them. He nodded. No judgment, just confirmation. We restricted access, documented everything, printed copies. Carl slid them into a manila folder and said, if you want to escalate this, you're well within your rights. Escalate. I thought of Daniel's smile, Melissa's careful tone, the way they said dad-like punctuation. I'm not ready, I said. Carl leaned back. You will be. That evening, the confrontation came sooner than I expected. Daniel was waiting when I got home, sitting at the kitchen table. Melissa leaned against the counter, arms crossed. The room smelled like reheated pasta and anger that had been given time to marinate. You locked us out, Daniel said. No, I replied, hanging up my coat. I locked you out of me. He stood abruptly. You don't get to do that. Not after everything we've done. Melissa added, this is incredibly hurtful. Hurtful. I sat down slowly. My knees complained, but I ignored them. Tell me, I said, how much you think you've taken? Daniel scoffed. Taken? Jesus, Dad. How much? I repeated. Silence. Then Melissa said it, sharp and precise. About 300,000. Not maybe, not approximately. About. And how much do you think you're owed? I asked. Daniel's voice dropped. All of it eventually. There it was. The clean line. The truth without decoration. I'm still alive, I said. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. And we're still responsible for you. Responsible. I laughed then. A short sound. It surprised all of us. You think this is responsibility? I said. This is bookkeeping. Melissa's face hardened. If you keep acting like this, You're going to make things very difficult for yourself. There it was again. The threat repackaged. Are you threatening to kick me out? I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That told me everything. I'll give you until the end of the month, he said finally. To calm down, to put things back the way they were. Or, I prompted. He exhaled through his nose. Or we'll have to rethink our arrangement. Arrangement? I stood up, slow, carefully. I buried my wife with my own hands, I said quietly. I worked 46 years without stealing from anyone. You don't get to give me ultimatums in my own life. Melissa opened her mouth. I raised a finger, not angry, just final. This conversation is over. That night I packed a suitcase. Not everything. Just enough. The watch Margaret gave me for our 30th anniversary. 3 shirts. The folder from Carl. I slept in my clothes. At 7:15 a.m., I left the house without saying goodbye. By noon, Daniel had left me 12 messages. By 3:27, the last one said, "You're making a huge mistake." I checked into a modest hotel near the courthouse. Beige walls, thin towels. Perfect. At the desk, the clerk asked, "How long will you be staying?" I thought about it. "As long as it takes," I said. That evening I called an attorney. Her name was Ruth Kaplan. She charged $450 an hour. She listened more than she spoke. When I finished, she said, "They didn't just exploit you. They documented it for us." I closed my eyes. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something like alignment. Painful. Clean. Ruth continued. "The threat your son made? That's useful." "Useful how?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "It tells us exactly who thought they owned what." I hung up and stared at the hotel ceiling, stained and anonymous. Daniel had threatened to cut me off. He just hadn't realized I was the one holding the cord. Ruth Kaplan's office smelled like lemon polish and old paper, not dusty, maintained. There's a difference. Dust means neglect. This place was kept sharp on purpose. Her assistant offered me coffee in a mug with a chipped rim. I accepted it. Small imperfections calm me. They mean someone didn't bother to replace a thing that still works. Ruth didn't start with sympathy. She started with questions. "Dates," she said, clicking her pen. "Amounts." Exact language. So I told her. I told her about April 3rd, about Zurich, about the mortgage payment I never agreed to, about the word depend, and the phrase "I can cut you off." She didn't interrupt. She underlined. When I finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. "Good news," she said. "This isn't subtle." "That doesn't sound like good news," I replied. "It is," she said calmly. "Subtle cases are harder to prove." She slid a yellow legal pad toward me. On it, she'd written a list. Unauthorized access, coercive control, financial exploitation of a dependent adult. Dependent adult. I flinched at that one. Ruth noticed. "It's a legal term," she said. "Not a judgment." "Feels like one," I muttered. She nodded once. "It always does." Over the next week, my life became paperwork. Bank statements highlighted in 3 colors. Screenshots of login histories. Text messages printed and time-stamped. Daniel had been careless. Confident people usually are. "We're basically supporting you now. Don't forget who's taking care of you. Let's not get dramatic." Ruth smiled thinly when she read those. "Never delete texts," she said. "They're better than witnesses." We filed a formal complaint with the bank first. Fraud department. Case number. A woman named Denise called me back within 48 hours and asked if I felt safe in my current living situation. I looked around my hotel room. Beige walls, stiff bedspread, humming ice machine in the hallway. "Yes," I said, and meant it. Then came the letters. 1 to Daniel, 1 to Melissa. Certified mail. Signature required. Ruth drafted them. I approved every word. They were polite, professional, cold. Cease and desist all financial activity on behalf of Mr. Thomas Avery, effective immediately. Any further attempts to access funds will be documented and prosecuted. Prosecuted. A word I never imagined attaching to my son. Daniel called within an hour of signing for the letter. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded confused at first, then angry, then desperate. "Dad, this is insane. You're letting a lawyer poison you against us." Melissa's message came next. Longer, softer, carefully emotional. We're just worried about you. This feels like retaliation. Retaliation. Ruth listened to the voicemails and nodded. They're shifting the narrative, she said. Expect it. On Thursday, we filed for a protective financial order. Temporary, but enforceable. It froze any joint access and flagged my accounts across 3 institutions. On Friday, Ruth requested copies of the mortgage documents. That was when things got interesting. The refinance Daniel had mentioned, the one with the insane rates, included something new. A clause. Buried. Technical. Signed electronically. A secondary obligation. Tie my funds as support assurance for their loan. They pledged your liquidity, Ruth said flatly. Without your informed consent. I felt my jaw tighten. How much? I asked. She turned the document toward me. $612,000. For a moment, the room went very quiet. That's more than half of what I had left, I said. Yes, she replied. And it explains their panic. That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear. From rage. The slow, mature kind. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that sharpens. On Monday, Ruth filed a motion to invalidate the clause. On Tuesday, the bank's legal department called her back. On Wednesday, Daniel's tone changed. He stopped yelling. Dad, he said in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 12 and caught lying. We need to talk. We are talking, I said, through my attorney. This doesn't have to get ugly, he said quickly. I pictured him pacing his kitchen. The expensive one. The one I helped buy. It already did, I said. Melissa tried a different approach. She showed up at the hotel. I saw her through the glass doors. Hair perfect, coat-tailored, concern carefully applied. I didn't let her in. She pressed her hand to the glass, like we were in a hospital. Please, she mouthed. I shook my head once. Later that afternoon, Ruth called me. They're backing off, she said. The bank wants to unwind the obligation quietly. Quietly for who? I asked. For them, she said. For you, it's a choice. I thought of Margaret, of how she hated quiet injustices more than loud arguments. No, I said. We proceed. Ruth smiled. I could hear it in her voice. Good, she said. Then we file discovery. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she replied, they'll have to explain, under oath, why they thought your money was theirs. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, traffic moved. People went to lunch. Life continued. Inside, something had finally snapped into place. For years, I had been shrinking myself to fit their comfort. Now the paperwork was expanding, and paper, unlike people, does not lie when pressed hard enough. The deposition was scheduled for April 17th at 9:00 a.m. Daniel had always hated mornings. As a boy, he used to miss the bus because he lost track of time. As a man, he delegated early hours to assistants and caffeine. Now he didn't have that luxury. Ruth met me in the lobby of the building 20 minutes early. Gray suit, flat shoes, a folder thick enough to hurt someone if thrown with intent. You don't have to say much, she reminded me. Let them talk. Daniel and Melissa arrived together. They didn't sit next to each other. That told me more than any document. Daniel looked tired. Not the dignified tired work, but the brittle kind. Eyes too sharp, jaw clenched like it was holding something back. Melissa looked composed, which meant she was furious underneath. Her hands were folded precisely on the table, fingers white at the knuckles. The court reporter adjusted her machine. The room smelled faintly of toner and coffee gone stale. Let's begin, the mediator said. Ruth nodded. Daniel's attorney, a young man with ambitious hair, cleared his throat. They started with formalities, names, dates, confirmations. Then Ruth slid the first exhibit across the table. Mr. Avery, she said calmly. Do you recognize this transaction? Daniel squinted at the paper. Yes, he said. Household expenses. Ruth didn't blink. For $27,500? Yes. For airfare to Zurich? He hesitated. Family emergency. Ruth turned the page. Whose emergency? My wife's sister's. And how did that relate to Mr. Avery's financial obligations? Daniel shifted in his chair. We were all under stress. I watched him carefully. He hadn't looked at me once. Ruth continued. Let's talk about the refinance. Melissa stiffened. Ruth placed the document on the table and tapped the clause with her pen. Did Mr. Avery attend this meeting? No, Daniel said. Did he authorize his assets as support assurance? Daniel paused. Too long. I assumed. Ruth cut in. Assumptions are not consent. The mediator leaned forward slightly. Melissa finally spoke. We were acting in his best interest. Ruth turned to her. By binding over $600,000 without disclosure? Melissa's voice sharpened. He wouldn't have understood the paperwork. There it was, the sentence they'd been circling for months. I felt something steady rise in me, not anger. Recognition. Ruth looked at me. Mr. Avery, do you feel you were incapable of understanding your finances? I answered clearly. No. Did you ask your son or daughter-in-law to manage your assets? No. Did they ever tell you they believed you were incompetent? Daniel looked up sharply. That's not what we're saying. Ruth nodded. Then we're aligned. The room felt smaller. The mediator called for a short recess. In the hallway, Daniel finally spoke to me directly. This has gone too far, he said quietly. We can fix this. Can we? I asked. He glanced around, lowering his voice. Just undo the lawyer stuff. We'll put things back. I'll apologize. I studied his face. The practiced sincerity. The impatience leaking through. You threatened to cut me off, I said. For my own money. His jaw tightened. I was angry. No, I replied. You were honest. Melissa joined us, eyes glassy now. You're humiliating us. I nodded. Yes. She flinched. Back in the room. Ruth laid out the final terms. Restitution. Immediate return of misappropriated funds. $312,000. Release of all obligations tied to the refinance. Permanent revocation of access. And one more thing. A written acknowledgement, Ruth said, that Mr. Avery was exploited financially. Daniel's attorney whispered urgently to him. Daniel shook his head. Absolutely not. Ruth didn't react. Then we proceed to court, she said, where this becomes public. The word public landed hard. Melissa closed her eyes. The mediator waited. 30 seconds can stretch forever when pride is bleeding out. Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was flat. Fine. The pen scratched across the paper. Once. Twice. Signature complete. Melissa signed without looking. When it was over, Daniel stood abruptly. This isn't over, he said. I met his eyes. For you, I replied calmly, it is. Outside, the air smelled like spring trying too hard. Ruth handed me copies of everything. You did well, she said. I didn't do anything, I answered. She smiled slightly. Exactly. That evening, I returned to the hotel. Same beige walls. Same thin towels. But the room felt different. Lighter. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. I hope you're happy. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone face down. Happiness had nothing to do with it. This was about balance. And for the first time in years, the numbers finally matched the truth. The money came back in pieces. Not ceremonially. Not all at once. Wire transfers arrived like reluctant apologies. Clean, silent, undeniable. $48,000 on April 22nd. $120,000 on April 25th. The remainder 2 days later, minus legal fees that I paid gladly. Ruth called to confirm each one. They're complying, she said. Quickly. Quick compliance is what people do when they're afraid of leaving fingerprints. By the end of the month, my accounts were whole again. Cleaner, actually. Fewer automatic drains. Fewer invisible hands. I moved out of the hotel on May 3rd. I didn't go back to Daniel's house. Instead, I rented a one-bedroom apartment near the river. 3rd floor, no elevator. Brick building from the 70s that smelled faintly of dust and boiled cabbage. The floors creaked honestly. The windows opened with a fight. I liked it immediately. The furniture was secondhand. The couch sagged on the left side. The kitchen had a single overhead light that hummed when you turned it on, like it was clearing its throat. I bought a small table and 2 chairs. One for me, one for guests I might never have. The silence here was different. Not punishing, neutral. Daniel didn't visit. Neither did Melissa. They sent one final email through their attorney, confirming compliance and wishing me well. Wishing is easy when you've already taken what you wanted. I blocked their numbers. Ruth said I didn't need to, legally. I told her it wasn't for protection. It was for accuracy. In June, I received a notice from a bank. The refinance clause had been formally voided. The lien released. My name removed from any obligation tied to Daniel's mortgage. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my file cabinet, behind Margaret's death certificate and our old house deed. Some papers you keep for closure, others for proof. Life became smaller after that. Not emptier, smaller. I learned the rhythm of the neighborhood. The bakery that closed at 3 p.m., the woman downstairs who practiced violin badly, but faithfully. The old man across the hall who smelled like menthol and watched game shows at unreasonable volumes. I started cooking again. Simple things. Soup, eggs, toast that burned on one side because the toaster leaned slightly left. On Sundays, I walked along the river with a thermos of coffee and no destination. No one asked me for anything. That took some getting used to. In July, Ruth called one last time. "The case is officially closed," she said. No further action from their side. "Good," I replied. She hesitated. "You all right?" I thought about it. "I'm solvent," I said. She laughed softly. "That's not what I meant." "No," I said, "but it's close enough." Daniel's name surfaced once more in August. A mutual acquaintance, a man I used to work with, ran into me at the grocery store. "I heard things are complicated," he said awkwardly. I nodded. "They say you went after them pretty hard." I considered the wording. "No," I said. I stood still. He didn't understand, but that wasn't my problem. At night, sometimes I thought of Daniel as a boy. Small hands, scraped knees, the way he used to ask questions just to hear himself think. I wondered where that boy went. But wondering is a luxury, and I had spent enough of my life paying for luxuries I didn't need. One afternoon in September, I found an old envelope in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. Inside was a receipt, yellowed, dated June 14th, 1981. First mortgage payment, $612. Margaret's handwriting was on the back. "We're doing it." I sat on the floor with the envelope in my hands and felt something settle. Not sadness, resolution. They had tried to take what I had built. They had failed, not because I was clever, not because I was ruthless, but because I finally stopped pretending love meant surrender. In October, I updated my will. Short, precise, boring. Daniel was mentioned once. Legally, irrevocably. I left the bulk of my estate to a foundation that helps older adults navigate financial abuse. Ruth didn't comment when she reviewed it. She just nodded. On the day I signed, I went home and cooked myself dinner. Pork chops, apples, too much butter. I ate slowly at my small table, alone and unafraid. Outside, the river kept moving. Inside, for the first time in years, nothing was being taken from me. And that, I realized, was a kind of wealth no one could ever threaten to cut off. The first snow came early that year. October wasn't finished, and already the river had begun to steam in the mornings, like it was giving up warmth reluctantly. I watched it from my kitchen window with a mug of coffee I'd made too strong on purpose. There was no one to complain. I had learned to enjoy that. My days had settled into something close to a rhythm. Not routine. Routine implies obligation. This was choice. I woke when I woke. I ate when I was hungry. I spent money without explaining it to anyone. The last part still felt strange. One afternoon, I bought a new coat. Nothing flashy. Wool. Hip. Dark blue. The kind of coat that doesn't beg for attention, but survives winters. The cashier told me the price, $4.20, and waited for hesitation. There was none. I wore it out of the store. In November, a letter arrived from the foundation Ruth had recommended. They thanked me for the initial endowment and asked if I'd consider speaking quietly, privately, to a man whose daughter had emptied his retirement account for safekeeping. I met him for coffee. He was 68, nervous, apologetic for taking up space. I didn't give advice. I showed him numbers, dates, patterns. He left straighter than he arrived. That felt right. Daniel never reached out again. Not for money. Not for forgiveness. Not even for performance. Sometimes silence is not punishment. It's acknowledgement. At Christmas, I received one card. No return address. Inside, 3 lines in careful handwriting. Dad, I hope you're well. D. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed it in the recycling. Not angrily, deliberately, because some things are not meant to be archived. On New Year's Eve, I cooked dinner for myself. Steak this time, medium rare. A glass of red wine I didn't finish. At midnight, there were fireworks over the river. Amateur, uneven, human. I thought of Margaret, of how she used to say justice wasn't loud. It was precise. In January, I closed the last joint account I'd forgotten about. A small one, $1,742 left inside. Interest, negligible. I transferred the money to my main account and closed the file. The clerk asked, "Any reason for closing today?" "Yes," I said. Accuracy. By spring, the anger was gone. Not buried. Not forgiven. Resolved. That's different. I planted herbs on the windowsill, basil, thyme, rosemary. Things that grow if you pay attention and die quietly if you don't. Sometimes, late in the evening, I caught myself rehearsing conversations that would never happen. Explanations, confrontations, reconciliations. Then I stopped, because justice doesn't require an audience. One morning in April, almost exactly a year after the deposition, I walked into my bank to update my signature card. Carl was still there. He recognized me immediately. "You look lighter," he said. "I am," I replied. As I signed the card, he said, "You know, a lot of people don't follow through. They see the truth and then talk themselves out of it." I handed the pen back. "I ran out of excuses," I said. On my way home, I passed Daniel's old neighborhood by accident. Traffic diverted me. I didn't slow down. I had already seen what was there. At home, I made lunch and ate it standing up, looking out the window. The river was high from spring melt. Fast. Unapologetic. I thought about the threat Daniel had made. "I can cut you off." It amused me now, not bitterly, just clearly, because the truth was simple, and it had been there all along. You cannot cut a man off from what he owns. You can only expose how badly you wanted to. That night, I sat at my small table and opened my notebook, the blue one. The last page was blank. I wrote one final line, balance restored. Then I closed it. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere people argued about money they didn't understand and love they mistook for leverage. Inside, I turned off the light. No one reached into my pockets. No one counted my worth. And for the first time in my life, everything I had was finally unmistakably mine.